Just ahead on American Black Journal, we're at the Detroit Policy Conference. The new CEO of the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History is here to talk about his vision for the Detroit Jewel, plus a new report on how to grow Detroit's African American middle class. It's all coming up right now on American Black Journal.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television.
For nearly 100 years, Ally has been a part of Detroit, and we give back by volunteering and donating in our community. We have a commitment to diversity and increasing economic mobility in our hometown. At Ally, we're dedicated to doing it right every single day.
Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson. We're coming to you from the Detroit Policy Conference at the Motor City Casino Hotel. It's hosted each year by the Detroit Regional Chamber. Business, community, and political leaders are all focusing on a vision for Detroit over the next decade. First guest has been tasked with leading the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History into the future. I'd like to welcome Neil Barclay to American Black Journal.
Thank you, Stephen.
Yes, and
good to
welcome
be here.
to Detroit.
Indeed,
yes.
Absolutely. My sixth week.
Yeah, that's really, really new, right? Well, I promise the weather is not always like this.
You promise?
Better. Yes, I do.
Okay.
So let's start with where you come to us from, your background, and what you hope to do with the Wright.
Yeah, so I'm coming here from the Contemporary Arts Center in New Orleans. One of New Orleans' sort of key cultural institutions. And my background is actually in museums and performing arts centers. Started out at the University of Texas, spent 7 years there. I'm the founding president of the August Wilson Center in Pittsburgh. Then went to the Contemporary Arts Center, and now I'm here.
Yeah. So what attracts you to the Wright and to Detroit?
Well, I actually knew a lot about the Wright. The Wright is kind of an iconic institution within Black cultural institutions, and when I was building the August Wilson Center with the Pittsburgh community, this was one of our comparables. So we looked a lot at how the Wright was formed and all those good things, and trying to think about what we wanted to build there. Yeah. So I was really familiar with it. I also am really attracted to Detroit, I have to say. Just its history and social activism, and its sort of renaissance that it's going through right now. It's great.
A lot of change.
A lot of change, exactly.
Right? Let's talk about where the Wright is right now, some of the challenges that you step into, and how you size them up so far.
Well, I haven't been there long. It's only 6 weeks, but certainly resources are always an issue at most first voice institutions. Black, Hispanic, Chinese institutions. We always have issues with putting together the kind of resources that make us be able to be competitive with larger institutions within the same community, right? So that's always an issue. I also really want to look at the spaces in the Wright, make sure that they're being maximized, make sure they're being used to their maximum potential. So that's something that really interests me. And then of course the programming, what we put on for the public, what community groups are working in the facility and how we're supporting them.
Yeah.
So all of those issues come to mind.
Yeah. One of the things that's different about the Wright than the other museums that we have here, I think, is the sense of ownership that the people of Detroit have.
They
right?
do. Indeed.
We had we had that feeling about Dr. Wright himself when he was here and his work, but the museum, which is his legacy, I think is it's buffeted a lot by people's expectations, and things like that. I wonder how you have found that. I know even in 6 weeks, you've had to have come into contact.
You know, it's in a way it's really great, and in most ways it's really great in the sense that sometimes you have an institution that really struggles to get the attention and the community behind it, right? Not the issue with the Wright at all. The stakeholders are very active, very vocal, and I think that's part of its strength. I think it's something I really want to try to build on, as its new leader. So that's been great.
You have an exhibit coming up that is a little bit controversial in parts of the Detroit community. And I should tell viewers that we're going to have you back with some other folks on another show to talk more about that exhibit. But it's an exhibit about Thomas Jefferson. It's an exhibit that's specifically about him as a slaveholder. Some people have had concerns about the way that it's portrayed.
Sure. Well, one, that characterization of the exhibition is not exactly what it is or what it's about.
It's a fuller
part of
I'm adding to the trouble here, right?
Thank you for that. But no, I mean, the exhibit did start out being about Jefferson and Monticello.
Yes.
And I think, to be fair to everyone who has looked at what it has been in the past and how it's been presented, they would get that impression. However, based on our wanting to bring it to Detroit, we knew that presentation was not going to fly here, right? And mind you, it started by the National African American Museum at the Smithsonian. They created it, right? But as we thought about Detroit, we thought, no, that's not really the story that we would be interested in as Detroit, folks living in this community with our history. So we really kind of flipped the exhibit on its head, I would say much to the consternation of Monticello.
Right, now they're unhappy, right?
They're okay, right? But what we really tried to do is tell the stories in that exhibit that are interesting to us. Certainly not discounting what Jefferson, contributed to democracy and to democratic thought and all of that. But really looking at this character, if you will, the person of Sally Hemings, her prodigy, the 5 families that lived there, how did they live, and their descendants. A large part of the exhibition is about the Hemings family, 5 other families, and also encouraging people to look into their own genealogy, to kind of think about, this notion of how mixed and how our histories have become intertwined over time.
Right. It's a complicated story.
Exactly.
And I always feel like there's tremendous pressure on museums and libraries and whoever wants to present parts of that history to get that complication right?
Exactly.
To get the nuance right.
But part of it is also to have the conversation. And what I really like about this exhibit for Detroit is we're going to have all the conversations that the exhibit, provokes, if you will. There are 12, 13 different panels, scholars coming in from all over the country, really, to talk about various aspects of the exhibit and the stories that are being told. So I think we're going to get a great airing, if you will, of a complicated subject, right? And I think it's perfect for Detroit in a lot of ways.
So how are you finding Detroit in 6 weeks? I
love it.
Other than the weather.
I almost like the weather, too, because I tend to be a little bit of a homebody. I like to cook and all those kind of things. So the weather keeps you inside, which is okay with me.
It definitely does,
But I do love it. I have to say, I really like the activism of the community. I find that refreshing. Having been many places in my career, there can be a lot of apathy around what you're doing or trying to get people's attention. That has not been the issue here. And I'm just happy to be here.
I'm always curious, folks who come here from New Orleans.
Yeah.
It's a place that I go a lot. It's
Yeah.
one of my favorite cities in the world. I always see a lot of similarities between the two, but also a lot of differences.
Well, Detroit, had a critical role in sort of the Great Migration from south to north,
absolutely.
right? And New Orleans has a similar role in being the place that people migrated from the Caribbean
into the
United States. So this notion of having a culture almost overlaid upon an indigenous culture is really interesting about both of those cities.
Yeah.
It's exciting about Detroit, and I think we'll uncover a lot of that, as we continue our programming and our work, and really really make the case of how central Detroit is, right, to the evolution of American thought, to black culture, etc.
Yeah. The Wright sits on what you would probably call a museum campus, or as close to it as we have. Those relationships are becoming more important, it seems, as the institutions recognize that their fortunes are tied together, right?
Well, and it's kind of a late aha moment to me, because they've always been tied together.
Right.
And we had this fantasy that we could maybe exist apart from one another.
Yeah.
But as time has gone on, we realize that each of us are part of an ecology. If one of us doesn't really work, the whole thing gets skewed in a bad way. So I think it's important for us all to work together. I'm actually really enjoying meeting my colleagues too in that area and talking about how we can work together. It's exciting.
This public space that the VIA is working on, that everyone is going to share, I feel like it's going to really build on the idea that these are related institutions.
Exactly.
This is a public, campus for the people of the
And with a unique identity and a unique contribution to make to that. I think what we don't want to lose in this sort of VIA Plaza project is this sense that we do have additional individual missions and purposes, etc., and not become part of one kind of narrative, if you will, about what culture is, what it's about. Particularly in Detroit, and the Wright, the African American piece of this is kind of the key, whether we all want to admit it or not. So the fact that we need to be central in that kind of, and how people perceive the cultural assets of Detroit.
Do you find that we have work to do making sure everyone understands that outside the city? The purpose of the Wright, the importance of that African American story to our region?
I think it's becoming more and more clear that we need, again, what I call first voice institutions to really talk about some of these complex issues from the perspective of a lived experience. When you talk about it once removed, there's always a certain amount of fog, if you will, that sets in about the basic facts, And I don't think you have that in institutions where the community or the constituency really lived those stories, right? So you have to really talk truth. You have to be very careful about the truth that you're telling, in that situation. But it adds to then the perspective that our other sister institutions can have on some of these stories and some of these issues. It's critically important, right? And even more so now.
Well, again, welcome to Detroit, and we look forward to getting to know you better as you lead the museum.
I'm looking forward to it. Absolutely.
Just ahead, the importance of growing Detroit's black middle class. But first, we continue our look back at this program over the last 50 years. Here's a 1969 report by host Tony Brown about the role of the city's African-American middle class.
Because the title of doctor has always worked magic in black social circles, they are most commonly identified as middle class. Along with them are the social workers, teachers, lawyers, and businessmen. The recent upsurge of militancy questioned their motives, attacked their status, and brought havoc to their cocktail parties. Instead of being called the black bourgeois, it was tightened up to plain booze. We asked some doctors to comment on the present upheaval.
The black middle class understands the problems of the disadvantaged blacks. Now, actually what happens is all of them don't do anything about it. You have certain organizations like ICBIF in the inner city that's doing an excellent job to help with black businesses. And you have other black middle class actually who are not doing anything there for themselves. but I feel they definitely understand the problem.
But do they understand? Do they understand that black people do not want to ape the value system, to get caught up in the rat race which the hippie, the middle class child is fleeing from? I think if we recognize the fact that the middle class has contributed leadership, but not in themselves, but in their children, who reject their values and who want to build a new value system around their blackness.
The average middle class person here in Detroit, as across the nation, is very much in touch with the more disadvantaged blacks. This is, for the most part, because they have frequent relations with them in work and in many contacts throughout the day. Not only that, but so many have their origins in that group, if not financially, certainly in associations with them throughout schools and clubs.
The black middle class as it exists is a microcosm of the macrocosm. That is, it's a little picture in a big picture. The society, as it sets down the values through Madison Avenue, tells us what to like and what not to like. And to a degree, we're all middle class in a way, because we internalize these values without really realizing it.
The leaders gathered here at the Detroit Policy Conference are discussing how to make the city a better place to live, work, and play. A new report from Detroit Future City suggests a major strategy for moving the city forward involves growing the African American middle class. Here to talk more about the report and its recommendations is the executive director of Detroit Future City, Anika Goss. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Stephen.
Yeah. So I'm going to start here. You and I grew up in the city at about the same time, in families that were firmly implanted in the black middle class that grew out of labor movement and all the other things that developed in this city.
That's right.
How did we get from that in our childhood to a place where most African Americans in the city could not imagine calling themselves middle class?
Right. I really think what happened is, well, what we've seen from the data is just after that, in the early 2000s, African American middle class households started to move to the suburbs. Some of that had to do with jobs, right? Like their jobs were already further and further out. But a lot of it had to do with the stability of the city itself, right? It was a time of transition. It was a really hard time for Detroit. And so you had to make hard choices about where to raise your family and where to invest.
Yeah. So in the report, it makes clear there's sort of two ends to this problem. One you just mentioned, which is that African American families no longer see much benefit to living in the city.
Right.
But it's also that the people who are left behind don't have that ladder from the poverty they live in.
That's
the
right.
economic opportunity, and I feel like that may be growing faster than people think it is.
Exactly, because when we began to lose the base, right, that African American middle class base, or the middle class base in general, then the people who are left are people who really couldn't afford to really maintain a lot of those neighborhoods, right, or a lot of the rest of the city. And so you are stuck with, or the people who are living there were really sort of entrenched in neighborhoods that were concentrated in poverty, that weren't really well served. And one of the interesting things that we found was that Detroiters, African Americans in Detroit, were 75% more likely to live in a neighborhood that did not have middle class, as opposed to their middle class white counterparts in the suburbs that were exactly the opposite. Like 80% of middle class white households live in white middle class neighborhoods. and middle class African Americans, especially in Detroit, just don't.
They don't.
And a lot of it is because there were so few neighborhoods.
Yeah. The racial dynamic here is driven by the fact that, in part at least, the city is just overwhelmingly African American.
Right.
There's almost not much point in talking about it in terms that try to cloak that.
Right.
But I also wonder if there are instructive things we ought to be concerned with regard to race and how race aggravates that situation.
Well, what we've seen is that there are stark inequities with things like jobs, job placement, and wage, and workforce outcomes, and educational attainment. And those inequities have been directly attributed to race. And that's really when that becomes part of the problem. And I think why it was so important for us to be able to focus on it this way is that if we're already seeing some of these inequities in a city that's majority African American, then once the city begins to grow and thrive and there's more opportunities, that means the people who are already here won't have the opportunity to take advantage of it, right?
Yeah, right.
And what we know about racial equity in general is that unless there is intentionality to be inclusive and to make sure that everyone can benefit, it just will not happen.
Yeah.
And so it was really important that people understand that this is like a really basic, data-driven, evidence-based issue, that we really want people to see this as an opportunity for Detroit. Detroit can lead the country in inclusive growth.
Yeah. Let's talk about solutions.
Yeah.
How do we get back even to the time when you and I were growing up in Detroit, when the black middle class was a huge part of the local economy and culture and all of that?
I think we can get there.
Yeah.
I think, well, for one, that middle class income bracket isn't this, just as it was when we were growing up. There's a lot of people in that bracket, right? So everybody from teachers to doctors can fall into that middle class income bracket.
That was kind of the magic of Detroit.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly. And so the infrastructure of Detroit to be able to accommodate a variety of income levels is still there. So it's not like we have to rebuild a whole new city for a diversity in income levels. We can actually grow and increase income household wealth now. We can increase the middle class and by attracting middle class families here now. So by looking at Detroit, we really believe there's about at least 3 different things that we need to focus on, really specifically. One is education attainment and wage. That making sure that our education attainment is higher. It's only 14% of Detroiters have a bachelor's degree or higher. That's something that we have to be able to do something about. It's got to be way higher. And 2, with education attainment, so even with the bachelor's degree, we need to be making more money.
African Americans make less.
Detroiters make less. Detroiters make significant, like 20,000 less than their suburban counterparts with the bachelor's degree. And so some of that is economic competitiveness, right? If we were attracting doctors, teachers, police officers in a really targeted and incentive-based way, we would be able to increase those wages much higher because it would be a much more competitive market for those kinds of careers, right? And we need to be really, really strategic about how to grow the income of the lower middle class that we have right now.
The people who live in...
That's exactly right.
And not anywhere near middle class. I mean, these are people, in some cases, living in poverty.
That's right. People who are living... We have to be able to create real pathways for growth. So whether that's job training, whether that's connecting community college to actual skills that are linking to jobs, whether it's looking at the healthcare industry, but really looking at industries that have a pipeline of jobs where people can actually move up. and how we actually get people into those positions, that needs to be a strategy. But it has to be a strategy that crosses sectors.
Right.
So education can't be in a silo
Just
by
government,
itself,
right? Yeah,
right?
right.
And automotive industry can't be in a silo by itself. We have to be able to cross these sectors so that we can actually create workforce outcomes for Detroiters.
Okay, a lot of work to do.
A lot, yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much for being here, and congratulations on the report.
Oh, thank you for having me.
That's our program for today. Thanks to the Detroit Regional Chamber for having us. Go to AmericanBlackJournal.org to get more information on our guests and to check out a calendar of events. Plus, you can always connect with us on Facebook and on Twitter. We'll see you next time.
Masco Corporation is proud to manufacture innovative and environmentally friendly products for the home. Delta faucets, craft-made in Merillat cabinets, and Behr brand paints have all been designed with you in mind. Masco and its family of companies, serving Michigan communities since 1929. How does diversity bring energy to us all? At DTE Energy, we believe that it's the contributions of all that build great communities. As a company, we grow stronger by welcoming the unique perspectives of everyone. As community members, we support our state's broad culture and heritage. From working closely with women and minority-owned suppliers to embracing our local cultures, DTE Energy is powering diversity. The DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit Public Television.
For nearly 100 years, Ally has been a part of Detroit, and we give back by volunteering and donating in our community. We have a commitment to diversity and increasing economic mobility in our hometown. At Ally, we're dedicated to doing it right every single day.